Good morning, my friends. My name is Gerdes, and this is the Daily Brief. So, Russia is ticking ever closer to that number. If they maintain about 800 a day by Sunday, they should be over 400,000 killed and wounded in Ukraine. And that's a week before the 2-year mark. It's enormous. Okay, Russia is building a 20-mile long Tsar train barrier in eastern Ukraine. And I saw this in Newsweek, and Newsweek is a little sketchy as a source, but they were referring to the ISW. I went back to the ISW. Russian forces appear to have constructed a 30-kilometer long barrier dubbed the Tsar train in occupied Donetsk Oblast, possibly to serve as a defensive line against future Ukrainian assaults. Satellite imagery dated May 10th, 2023 and February 6th and 10th, 2024 shows that Russian forces constructed a long line of train cars stretching from occupied Olvinka, south of Donetsk City, and Volnovka, southeast of Voldahar in North Mariupol over the past 9 months. A Ukrainian source reported on February 11th that Russian forces have assembled more than 2,100 freight cars into a 30-kilometer long train. Wow. So they're going to be using that as a defensive barrier. They do this on the southern border in the United States as well. And so apparently they're going to continue to build this like a North Korea kind of divide. I don't know exactly what they're going to be doing with that, but it's something to pay attention to. Okay, in the United States, the Senate advances Ukraine aid over conservative blockade. Well, they had some opposition, but there were still enough conservative votes to easily get over the threshold. The Senate voted for the third time in the past week to advance funding for Ukraine and Israel, despite strong opposition from conservative Republicans who balked at the package, not including a House bill to tighten the southern border. Well, we know what happened to that, so they put together their own just defense bill and pushed that forward. The Senate voted for the second time now, 67-27 Sunday afternoon to move the $95.3 billion package another step toward final passage, assembling in the chamber shortly before the Super Bowl kickoff. I bet they wanted to vote quick. The package included $60 billion for Ukraine, as we know. The Senate floor debate has spilled into what was supposed to be a 2-week recess because conservatives, led by Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, protested the legislation by refusing to speed up votes. Okay, so some background. Someone like Rand Paul, he's never seen a war spending bill that he's ever liked. He's a libertarian, and he always fights against that. So I give him a pass. Others are not in that same camp. The Senate Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, speaking right after Schumer, warned that failing to support Ukraine would put America's allies at risk by giving China a green light to project power in Asia and the Indo-Pacific. He's absolutely right. So again, this is a Senate Republican leader saying this kind of thing. And again, his party is very split. McConnell's pointed admonishment about America's role in preserving global security came in response to the sharp criticisms from conservative colleagues who were lambasting him for working with Schumer. But remember, what it meant to be a conservative for most of my life was conservative social policy, conservative economic policy, and conservative foreign policy. And somehow Republicans have forgotten all about that in recent days. Okay, next. Okay, we talked about Tucker Carlson's interview at some length, but here in RT, I just thought this article was fascinating. Putin's interview with Carlson, mind-blowing, according to a South African researcher. Listen to this guy effusively talk about just how dreamy the interview is. This is an RT, so it's going to be propaganda, but nonetheless, it's just fascinating to read. Russian President Vladimir Putin's interview with American journalist Tucker Carlson last week was mind-blowing and explosive, a South African researcher has told RT. He's a research fellow at the University of Johannesburg Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation, who noted that people had a strong desire for an in-depth explanation of Putin's decisions. Many across the world would have wanted to hear President Putin speak and explain the Russian thinking, the Russian position on the issue. People were essentially starved of a narrative from Russia, of information from Russia, he said. People were thirsty for that kind of in-depth explanation, the academic added. Well, you could see it everywhere in all RT, all TASS, all Pravda, Sputnik. It's not like you can't see it. And those positions, even if you can get RT, are reprinted almost wholesale in many African newspapers and international papers. So you could have all of his opinions well before we got to this interview. Okay, next. So yesterday I showed you how Trump was talking about if NATO doesn't pay their fair share, then, they shouldn't, Russia can do whatever they want to them. Well, what was interesting about that was how it fell flat. Like, there were a couple people just wildly cheering. Trump opened his mouth and talked. And then there were other people in the audience going, go back yesterday and look at my 3 big stories and you'll see what I'm talking about, because I highlighted that. And okay, so here's another clip. I'm not sure if it's the same rally or not, but here's another clip where he's talking about Zelensky, and he's calling Zelensky the greatest salesman in the world. But listen to what he has to say, because I've heard Republicans say this same kind of thing, that it never would have happened under his watch, and they really do tend to believe that.
I think the greatest salesman ever in history is Zelensky. And I like Zelensky because during the hoax of, the impeachment hoax, they said I made a threatening phone call to him. And when they asked him, he said, no, it wasn't threatening. It was a very nice call. He could have played to the bandwagon. He didn't do that. He told the truth. So I like Zelensky, but that war's got to end. We can make a deal on that war. One of the things we're going to do is...
Okay, but again, we can make a deal under what terms? So if Ukraine loses its land in making that deal, that's not a good deal. If the Russians can go rebuild their army and come back later and do it again, that's not a good deal. If Ukraine's never going to be able to enter NATO and have the protection it would have had, that would have prevented Russia from actually doing this, that's not a good deal. I'm sure you can make a deal, but would it be a good deal? Okay, let's keep going.
We're going to get that war ended. That war is a disaster. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are being killed, far more than you're reading about. And you notice you don't hear about that war anymore. You know why? Because they're not doing well, that's why. Because the fake news is totally bought in, and now they're saying this is not working out. No, we got to get that war settled.
All right, so and there's something true to what he's saying here that you're not hearing about it. It's not, and like if Ukraine started really like pushing Russia back, it would be significantly covered. Right now, the only way you're going to get coverage is in print news or on YouTube, because it's really not covered like it used to be on mainstream news.
And I'll get it settled. It would have never happened with Putin. It would have never happened.
Listen to this.
And by the way, it didn't happen for 4 years. It didn't happen. We'll get it settled.
So there's polite applause because people are just not into the issue of Ukraine in the Republican Party, generally speaking. So they're like, yeah, okay. But I'm telling you, they believe that if Trump was president and Biden hadn't shown this terrible weakness when he left Afghanistan, then Ukraine would not have happened. Very many Republicans that I know have told me that same kind of thing. So I'm just telling you, I'm not saying that that's the truth. I am saying that that is how Republicans think about the issue. Okay, last little bit. Andres Schlegel, I don't know who he is, but he said, why does Russia use Z instead of the normal Nazi swastika? Copyright or license issues? Okay, well, that's an interesting question. Obviously, it's not the same thing, but it's a great way of showing, hey, they are kind of doing some similar things, and good on you, Andres, for asking that in such a clever way. Okay, that's all that I have right now. Thank you for the likes, the shares, and the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.